Okay, 3 days ago, I went by Harbor Freight. Can you believe it? But I picked up this 14-ounce titanium framing hammer for 60 bucks. 25 years ago, I was given this Stiletto 14-ounce titanium framing hammer. Been using it ever since, and I'll tell you right off the bat, I like my daily driver a lot better than I like the new guy on the block. The value solution to the question of how heavy should my framing hammer be. I'm 67 and I've been a carpenter since I was 19 years old. So I've swung a few hammers, and I used to think that a heavy hammer was the solution to heavy output. But, for most of the last part of my career doing remodels and additions, this lighter hammer was a shoulder saver. I've already talked about that in a video we did. But let's go head to head and I'll tell you why this is a better tool, or at least I like it better than this thing, even if it saves you money. First things first, does it hammer? Drop the nail into the magnetic nail holder, that works great. Yes. It hammers pretty good for a 14-ounce hammer. Let's do that again. 3 blows is pathetic. A heavier tool puts it in faster, but we already knew that. So the answer is yes, the magnetic nail holder holds a nail, and yes, a 14-ounce titanium hammer will get the work done. Not in the same way with the same authority, but there are offsetting benefits. Let's see what it does in a really hostile environment. And besides that, who wants to hit their thumb with a tenderizer like that? We're going to give somebody something to be thankful for. Let's see how a 14-ounce hammer drives a 30-inch square concrete stake. Now we know it's an uphill fight. But before I start that, I've got a story. The first day of my life that I was paid to do carpenter work, I was green. And the lead man was a guy named Art, and he was big and he was strong and he had a short fuse, and I was scared of him. And I showed up with a 20-ounce Vaughan hammer, a Vaughan 999, I think they were. They're classics, good hammers. And the milled face was as sharp as a tenderizer, right? I mean, it was sharp. And he said, "Here, let me see that hammer." And there was a piece of rebar sticking out of a footing, and he wailed on the end of that rebar and blunted the milled face. And I thought, well, you rascal, I just paid 12 bucks or whatever I paid. But by the end of the week, I was glad that he had done that, because the first time you hit your thumb with a sharp hammer face, you wet right down both legs and go sit in the truck, or you want to. But let's see how this titanium stands up to some mild steel. Well, I'm glad I'm not the steel, I can tell you that. This is a case of speed can compensate for less mass in a hammer blow right up to a point. I don't care how fast you swing this, it doesn't want to push that much steel into that kind of grade. But what we're testing is the hardness of the titanium compared to the hardness of the mild steel. So you can see what it did right there. That is as sharp as sandpaper from the mill faces. It's better. Let's see what else we can do with this. We can blunt it all the way around the perimeter of the face. Okay, it's hard. It's definitely titanium. Okay, it works. It drives a nail. And so now the price point becomes a big deal. It does the job. It costs less money. But how does it feel? It feels just the same as this flying through the air. And by the way, there is what the steel face, see, this is first generation. They've got a steel face, I guess, glued onto the titanium. And so after 20 years, that's pretty well smoothed off, but that's normal. And so as it flies through the air, it feels just the same. Except the handle does not feel good. The handle is too big. It's kind of gross. It is kind of, now they're different, but this is a lifeless handle. There's absolutely no possibility of any flex in there. And flex in a hickory handle is sort of it's storing energy a little bit. There's a little rubber band action, or at least I can imagine that in a smaller profile handle, something that feels better in your hand. This just doesn't feel right. But I can solve that with a sander. I mean, lots of guys sort of sculpt hammer handles to fit anyway. I did this first day I used this beautiful plumb rigging axe, it was just too big, so I sized it down. And if I was going to use this every day, I would do the same thing. Let's see how it pulls a nail. Let's drive this in. So you put that in a trimmer or something, you realize it's a mistake. Oh, it doesn't want to come out. What you do is, to save the handle, you turn it around sideways, and yep, it's nice and sharp in there. And it got a bite. Can you see that? What I'm testing here is the sharpness of the inside of that cut. And they got that nice and sharp, so it'll get a purchase on the nail and bring it out incrementally. Now you can pull a few nails like this, but even an axe-eye-shaped handle head, hammer, that's an axe-eye configuration. Even that's going to break eventually. Now you learn to preserve your hammer handle if you can. This was the original handle that came in that hammer, and it lasted up until 6 years ago when I pulled it out voluntarily and put a new one in. So what does that mean? I got 15 years out of it. Because with a wooden handled claw hammer, you try to always pull the nails sideways. Now if you can't, this is not a big nail, but if that was a big nail, you can put a fulcrum under there and increase the strength of that lever. You see that? There's always something laying around, if you don't have a cat's paw, a piece of wood or anything, to kind of reduce the energy that you're using to try to tear that off. Let's talk about fit and finish of the casting or forging. Part of it's confirmation bias, but they're gilding the lily here. There's too much pointless decoration. Now, I get that decoration is marketing, and marketing is what keeps people in business, but I don't like the looks. It frankly looks cheap, but that's okay because it was cheap. But in general, they're so close to the same thing that the discrepancies don't make much difference. It's rough. Now it's intentionally rough in there. That's smooth. The contrast looks nice, but I don't like that there's no reduction in cross-section right behind the eye. I like that right there. I mean, it's the little things that mean a lot in how things look and sometimes how things work. They've dropped some cheeks down onto the side of the handle a little further than my old trusty. That'll protect the hammer against overstrikes a little better, but they are bulky and kind of gross, and they look like this is the first iteration and maybe they'll refine it, but I bet they don't. Now when you're going to the store to pick out the hammer, here's something that either A, you've never thought of, or B, you're confused about, and that is the grain in the hammer handle. There are lots of good videos on YouTube about rehafting axes and hammers, and there's a lot of conversation about checking the grain of your hammer handle. Here is what the variables are and the things you ought to think about. Here's a couple of boys' axes. A boys' axe is, 2.5 pounds, fairly short handle. We've done a video on boys' axes. They're a great tool. Can you tell any difference of these two handles? I mean, they've got a little different recurve. The fawn's foot's about the same. The length is about the same. There's a glaring difference between these two handles that's going to make all the difference in how long it lasts and whether it quits you at the worst possible moment. Of the 4 characteristics of the wooden handles on our tools, slope of grain is the first and the biggest variable. Let me show you what I mean by slope of grain. Here's a piece of red cedar. It's got a knot. You don't want any knots in any of your axe or hammer handles, but this is nice straight grain cedar. See that? The grain is pretty much straight all the way down the piece. Now it was coming to another knot down here, but that is what you want if you can get it in a hammer handle. Because if it's slope of grain, you get this. See that? If the tree grew and the board was cut and the handle was taken out of the board in such a way that the grain travels across the width of the handle in either direction, the depth or the width, sooner or later, bam, it's going to break in that short distance. So let's go back to the sine qua non handle that we have here. This is a Snow and Neely handle. Snow and Neely, premier axe manufacturer in Maine someplace. I don't know if they're still in business or not. A friend of mine sent this to me. What a beautiful, beautiful tool. The grain remains centered on the handle pretty much all the way down. Now that recurve that's so ergonomic means that the grain that starts in the center up here finally travels out down here. Can you visualize that? Compare that to this that I bought off the shelf in a hurry, didn't matter. The grain on this starts right here and runs out right there. Can you track that growth ring right there? Center of the handle, comes down and exits right there. The handle that was broken out of this little Swedish axe a year and a half ago by a friend of mine, thanks buddy, broke for that reason, that the grain exited the handle about the midpoint and it snapped right off. Now look at this. Here's another great example of that. I don't know how much this hammer weighs, 16 pounds or something. When I got it, it had a series of zip ties trying to hold that split together because the grain exits right up here and it was in the process of splitting. Even though it remained centered all the way down, the split started because it exited the profile of the handle and then traveled to the middle. Slope of grain is a big deal. Okay, the next characteristic is grain orientation. Which way the growth rings are going inside the piece. House Handle Company, and I got a ton of confidence in those guys. When I buy 200 handles of their premium blacksmith handle, the grain is always slab grain, flat grain, growth rings in this direction every time. This $60 titanium is a pretty good example of flat grain, slab grain, like they did it on purpose, maybe. This Snow and Neely handle, and like I said, they have a sterling reputation, is the opposite. That is quarter sawn vertical grain with the growth rings going across the handle instead of up and down the handle. And then finally, this Stiletto is a beautiful example, like beautiful textbook of slab grain, flat grain, and also very tight growth rings, which is better. I've got a little test that I've rigged up in the wood shop that might work. Let's see if it tells us anything useful. Okay, imagine that these are hammer handles. Okay, now they're not, they're white oak, but imagine that those are hammer handles. These two pieces are 1/8 by 3/4, and they were both cut out of this board. The growth rings on this board are going in this direction. So one of these pieces is cut off like this. And one of these pieces is cut out of the board like this. Let's see which one of these is stronger. I put my two miniature hammer handles, they're glued into this little jacket here. I have no idea if this is going to work. Here is a wedge that I'm going to slide in between these hammer handles. All right, now as we drive that wedge in there, I hope that it's stressing these things the same. Let's see which one bends more and if one of them will break. Okay. That one failed. Yes, this is the vertical grain. This is the one with the growth rings going like this. It's a little confusing because the medullary rays which create the fleck show up going the other way. But the vertical, oh look at that. There you can see the growth rings pulling apart in the vertical grain application. So I think, see, it's kind of a finger joint. It pulled apart like they were finger joints. Neat. So I think that this is an indication that the slab grain is stronger. Look at that thing taking it. Now if you look here, here is some more of that oak. You can see the growth rings. So in general, if your hammer handle has the growth rings going like that, it's going to work well, but it's not as strong as if the growth rings are going the other way across the handle. At least that's what I think our test shows us. You came to this video to decide whether you wanted to save money on a titanium hammer. And so, here's my answer. If you need to save money, then by all means save money. But saving money is not the only consideration on buying a tool. A tool has to perform. You have to be able to keep up. You have to be able to increase your productivity. You have to like the way it feels in your hand. It has to be something that you will be able to graft into the machine that your body is. You're grafting extensions of the machine to your body, and it's got to feel right so that it responds right. And then the last thing is, there has to be some satisfaction in the way that it looks. I mean, beauty is not nothing. And yeah, so when you pick the hammer, that's going to define your career as a carpenter, doggone it, keep in mind that that hammer defines your career. I started out for a long time being defined by rigging axes, plumb. Now, not this one, but I loved them. I used my Vaughan 999 for a long time. And for the last part of my career, which, by the way, is going to end up being the last part of my career, where'd it go? It's over there. My Stiletto defines me as a carpenter. So you got to make these choices. You've got to be responsible with your resources. I know a guy that had every single stiletto that they made as they made them. If they made them, he had to own it. Okay, man, I mean, that's kind of putting a lot of eggs in one basket, isn't it? I guess his wife was all right with that. She's wanting to do the same thing with her tools, get what she can use and be productive with and take satisfaction in. So be wise, do your own testing, talk to your own mentors, look around and see what the people around you are using. But if you need to save some money and you've got a grinder that you can take to this ugly handle, I don't think you'd be sorry if you went down to Harbor Freight and picked up one of these things. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.